Hey there from Darrington, Washington, and for Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Texas Hill Country. Chicago is here. I wonder why Chicago decided to come today. Cortez, Colorado, Asheville, North Carolina, Farmington, Arkansas. I don't think I've done a double yet. Reno, Nevada, Bushnell, Florida, Oslo. Okay, that's not a double. And Kristen is here from California from Facebook. So we have Facebook here as well. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming here this afternoon for our special guest today, Governor J.B. Pritzker from Illinois. Governor, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Heather.
So there's an awful lot of things that I would like to ask you about, but I'm going to start with something that I've been wondering about a lot lately as more and more billionaires seem to be jumping into the business of governance. Why did you decide to go into public service?
I'm so glad you asked that because I do get asked that question a lot, and it is a peculiar moment, I think, to have wealth and also be in politics. But I can tell you, at least in my family, it's not an unusual endeavor. Indeed, virtually every generation of my family, my grandfather served in the Navy. So too, my father was a crypto analyst in the Navy, an officer. My uncle also. My sister was the Commerce Secretary for Barack Obama. And I have served in a variety of capacities in government and now, of course, in elective office. So it comes naturally in my family to be involved in public service. But I'll also say I get why people ask in this moment, because we have billionaires that are attempting to thwart the system to their own benefit, indeed, often corruptly. And certainly as they have supported President Trump, they do it in support of someone who has demonstrated virtually every day in office that his administration is corrupt and often to their benefit. So I understand why people ask questions about it. And all I can say is, I think the question that people ought to be asking is, what are the values of the people who are attempting to serve in public office? And do they deliver on their promises to working families? Are they doing what's asked of them that's in the best interests of the people who elected them? And I think I have done that. And I understand the skepticism that people start with.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about the sort of people you're talking about, we do, of course, have the examples of the Roosevelts, Theodore Roosevelt, for example. And I'm going to ask you more about that era in which he lived, but also FDR. So, you're walking in trodden footsteps. But in that vein, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because of what's been going on in Illinois. And what I mean by that is that the way that the state has essentially taken into its own hands the good of its people and tried to work within the state boundaries to create sort of its own version of democracy reminds me very much of the earlier progressive era in the Midwest of people like Fighting Bob La Follette or John Peter Altgeld in your own Illinois. And I would love to talk really in some detail about what you have done in Illinois and your ideas of how states can be a model for democracy going forward in the same way, or rather the opposite way, that we have tended to see states' rights in a number of Republican-dominated states as moving in a really retrogressive way. And so many people think of states' rights and they think only of that backward movement. And yet a state like Illinois is very consciously, it seems to me, moving forward. And can we break that down in some detail? Because it really seems to me that you have led on debt relief, education, bringing in business, and so on. And I'd like to know if you have a model, how you are doing it, and how you see that as a potential model for the nation.
Well, when I ran for governor back in 2018, I talked a lot about putting Springfield, that's our capital, putting Springfield back on the side of working families, because it had gotten off that center and focus on people who really need government, just to give them a little bit of a hand up. Sometimes, of course, the most vulnerable need more than that. But the focus of government shouldn't be on the wealthiest people, but it should be instead on the people who really make this country great, the middle class, the working class, and again, the people who are most vulnerable in our society, who, are left out and left behind. So when I think about the models for, how I behave and what it is that we're doing here, I know you put it in the context of states' rights, and it's certainly true that we are taking advantage of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution and thinking a lot about the Supremacy Clause and how it is that we can operate in a world where Donald Trump is taking advantage of that clause in a corrupt fashion. And I would just say that although that's true that we are taking advantage of states' rights, again, it's because of my focus on the people who really need government most and how we can deliver for them. So all of the things that you mentioned, and when you asked kind of what's the North Star, we may not think of FDR, for example, as having had states' rights in mind.
To the contrary.
Exactly, maybe the opposite.
All of FDR's national program comes directly from his work in New York State.
Well, it's a good point. And actually, I want to say we have a governor, you didn't mention him, but we have a governor that served during the time of FDR, who carried out the New Deal in the state of Illinois. And he was, in fact, I'm in my office and I have his portrait on the wall. But he wasn't a states' rights advocate either necessarily, but what he was focused on was doing the right things for the people of Illinois. And again, John Peter Altgeld, same thing, was standing up for the people of Illinois. John Peter Altgeld, our governor in the late 1890s, or mid 1890s, I should say, actually called out our National Guard to protect the strikers at the Pullman factories in Illinois when the federal government was sending troops to stand on the side of industrialists against the workers. And that certainly was a states' rights endeavor, but also so much an analogy for what we've had to do to fight Donald Trump in this era of ICE and CBP and their attacks on our states.
So when I was a little girl, I was actually born in Illinois. Long story there. And one of the earliest political figures my mother ever told me about was John Peter Altgeld. So, and you spoke about him. I wrote about that. You spoke about him in your State of the State this year, as I recall.
I did. And again, the analogy of, standing up to the federal government when we needed to protect the people of our state, that really was the theme of my mention of him. But he was the one who implemented child labor laws to make sure that children weren't being recruited at, very young ages to work in industrial plants. And he was really the person who stood up, as I mentioned, for labor unions and the right to collectively organize and get better wages. And these are things that I believe in too. And so, but you talked about, states as a kind of a laboratory for democracy or a laboratory for policy. And indeed, that's what we've been doing here. You mentioned, for example, canceling medical debt. We eliminated billions of dollars in medical debt in this state for people who are up to 3 times the poverty level. And there are lots of people walking around with $1,500 or $2,000 or $3,000 of medical debt, sometimes much more than that. And they can never pay it because they're only earning $50,000 a year, and they can barely make it on that, 50 or 60,000. And yet, their credit rating has been affected by it. The guilt that lays on them. And these are often people who they got into a car accident or they got a disease that they didn't know they would get. It's not their fault. They had to go in a hospital and they're getting bills, and now collection agencies calling them. That's not right. And especially in this era when we ought to finally have universal health care, we need to make it a lot easier for people to get access to a doctor and be able to pay for it. So we're trying to alleviate that burden. That's an example of, I don't know if I'd call it unique, but we were the first state, along with Connecticut, we did it at the same time actually, that really had a state program to eliminate medical debt. And we did it didn't take much money. For every $1 billion of medical debt that we canceled, it cost $10 million.
Yes. Can you please explain to people how you did that, which seemed like such a no-brainer once it was done?
Yeah. So there's a great nonprofit that was actually philanthropists helped to create it, called Undo Medical Debt, UNDUE. And they were really in the business of buying, usually for small towns and cities, for the people who live in those towns and cities. No state had ever done this. Buying uncollected medical debt from collection agencies that were never really going to collect this money. And the collection agencies get a percentage of whatever they're able to collect when they're handed these overdue bills. And they weren't going to get any money on it. And so undue medical debt would go and buy, for essentially on average a penny on the dollar, medical debt, because these collection agencies wouldn't even have gotten a penny for it. So we were able to use undue medical debt, this nonprofit, to go in and talk to all the hospitals and healthcare providers. We're still on the hunt, by the way, for medical debt that we still haven't maybe uncovered at these providers. And it was something that was so easy for us to do because it didn't cost very much money. The Cook County, I want to give credit where credit is due. Cook County, our largest county where Chicago is, was actually the pioneer in our state. They went after it first. And I looked at Cook County and said, why are we not doing this for the entire state? So really 4 times the amount of medical debt we're able to cancel across the state of Illinois that they did in Cook County. So I'm very proud of that. And yes, it's an unusual endeavor, but I want to talk about affordability because this is in the same vein. You know, our insurance companies announced, in particular homeowners insurance, announced last year that they were raising homeowners insurance rates by 27% in 1 year. 27%. People can't afford to pay for, their mortgages, let alone to pay 27% higher homeowners insurance. So, we said this shouldn't be possible. And do we regulate them enough or have them report enough to the state and give us the opportunity to force them to prove why they need a hike that big? They claimed that it had to do with climate change and the effects in Illinois. But at the time they did it, we were not a state that was massively impacted. I mean, Florida, yes, of course, not Illinois. And so we suspected that they were really gouging their customers. So we just passed a bill yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I'm proud to announce it today, along with an auto insurance bill that allows us to bring down rates for families across the state of Illinois. I think these are things that we all ought to be thinking about and using our states to sort of figure out what works. What is actually going to effectively lower costs? I hate the word affordability because I don't think people really understand the concept. What they understand is lower my prices. Everything costs too much. So we eliminated the grocery tax in our state, for example. We're not the first state to do that, but it was something I looked at and said, why are we charging people, already being gouged by the high cost of groceries with a tax on top of that? So we eliminated that just 2 years ago. Anyway, these are all things that I've been engaged in doing. Also, free community college in the state and paid leave. These are all things that I got done. Maybe people don't expect someone that they look at and say, oh, he's a billionaire, to be standing on the side of working people. But that's the whole reason that I ran for office in the first place.
Well, so let's also add in there, Illinois has raised the minimum wage, right?
That's right. Thank you. That's probably the most important, affordability measure. But, helping people, deal with inflation is, how about if we raise wages in the state? So Illinois was at $8.25 when I took office, and I passed in my first year. In fact, the first bill that I pushed through the legislature, and it was my introduction, and the first bill that I signed was raising the minimum wage to $15. And even though today you might say, well, that's not enough. And indeed, my Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, who's now the Democratic nominee for United States Senate, has proposed a national minimum wage hike to $25 an hour. And I just have to say, if we can put more money in people's pockets, give them the right to organize and get a better wage, and raise the minimum wage. And I've raised the minimum wage for teachers in my state as well, the minimum salaries. If we can do all those things, I mean, that is the most effective way to make everything more affordable.
Okay, but this is what really interests me about Illinois is that you are doing all of these things that have been, I mean, they're called progressive. I would suggest that Teddy Roosevelt was a bit ahead of us on asking for all of these things, and he can hardly be called progressive for today since he was running around more than 100 years ago. But the other real thing that I've watched out of Illinois that fascinates me is that when you came into office, Illinois' credit rating was in the dumpster. And you have gotten, is it 10 credit upgrades?
Yes.
So tell us, please, how you have managed to level the playing field economically the way it seems that Illinois is trying to do, and yet repair the state's finances.
Well, I have to start with my Republican predecessor decided that he wanted to destroy labor unions in the state. And the way he would do it is by refusing to sign a budget that would be passed by a Democratic legislature until Democrats acceded to his demand to destroy labor unions. Well, Democrats didn't give in. And by the way, that is how we ought to be operating today at the federal level. The Congress needs to stand up to this president the way that our legislature stood up to the governor of this state. But we went 2 years without a budget because this governor was unwilling to sign a balanced budget and demanded the destruction of labor unions. 2 years. So by the time he was running for re-election, we had collected up about $17 billion in unpaid bills. And we were paying a 12% interest rate on overdue bills because that was in state law. If people were doing services for the state not getting paid, that we would give them 12% for every month for every year we were late, 1% a month. And that was costing $1 billion right there just to pay off, the interest on the debts that he was racking up. So when I came in office, $17 billion in the hole, and we really hadn't balanced the budget in many years in the state. It was sort of covered up that we were running deficits. So I came into office at a time when people understood that we need to get back on track. We were 50th in credit rating, 50th out of 50 states.
Wow.
And we also had a massive pension debt and still do, but we were headed the wrong direction. We were 39% funded pensions, 39%. So all of this kind of fell on my shoulders. The first thing I did when I ran was I pledged that I would fight like hell to get a graduated income tax in Illinois. We have a single flat rate income tax in Illinois. It wasn't working. And of course, that's regressive as heck. People at the lower end of incomes, because of all the flat taxes across the state, were paying 13 or 14% taxes. And people who are the wealthiest in the state were paying 3 or 4% of their income. So I wanted to have a graduated tax system. Now, we weren't able to get it done. Legislature passed it, but we couldn't get the public to vote the 60% threshold that we needed. Nevertheless, we did things like when we legalized cannabis, we made sure that we were taxing it properly so that we could bring income into the state. We did a number of things. We brought the internet sales tax. You may recall there's a Wayfarer decision that allowed states to tax internet transaction, which, by the way, even though that's a flat tax, it was very unfair to allow that to happen. So Amazon was able to sell without paying taxes, but the local store in your neighborhood had to pay sales taxes. That wasn't right. So these are all things that we did. That's on the revenue side. And then we had to start rationalizing, what are our priorities? Education, healthcare. Let's focus on the things that really matter in people's daily lives. And so we did all of that, balanced the budget at the same time. And over the course of my time in office, we've had to, frankly, rebuild a hollowed out government because the Republican before me had essentially let all these departments sort of fall away. So I mean, I do think we're a kind of a, we're certainly not, remember the Massachusetts miracle from years gone by. We're not the Massachusetts miracle, but it's a kind of a miracle that we've been able to go from, the situation we were in where really it felt like everything was falling off a cliff to a situation where we're much better funded. Our pension system is much better funded. We have higher wages in the state. We have a balanced budget that is actually balanced. No, our structural deficit has been reduced significantly. And even in this moment, and I'm talking to you with 4 days to go in the legislative session, we still haven't passed the budget yet through the legislature, but I proposed a balanced budget and they're going to pass a balanced budget. So for 8 years in a row, then I will have gotten balanced budgets passed in our state, paid down debt, about $12 billion of debt that's been paid down. We got rid of all those unpaid bills, by the way. We no longer have unpaid bills. We used to have a 250 days it took the state to pay a bill. But when I took office, 250 days. If we owed you money, that's how long it would take for us to pay you. Today, it's about 16 days. So we've really, I think, in a fiscally responsible way, restored government, funded education, healthcare, and made sure that we're delivering services for people, child welfare, and the rest. And there's still so much more to do, but I'm very proud of the progress we've made.
Well, what interests me about it is that when you talk about the Massachusetts miracle, which really took a state that was starting to be gutted out from the changes in industrialization and really targeted investment at high tech. And it was indeed a miracle, but it was taking a state and investing in a certain way. What it seems to me you have been doing in Illinois is really showing that it is possible to provide services that people need and that create a strong society. I've been watching, and in fact, Illinois has been climbing the charts in terms of states where businesses want to go, in part because you've got more education and more investment in the things people want to have. But you have done it at a time that you are not running huge deficits because of it, and you have managed to make it clear that this is financially sound. And that demonstration in this moment strikes me as being very important because you are suggesting at a time when many people have lost faith in government, that government can in fact work. And that strikes me as being a really important sort of poster child for those people saying the only thing America can do at this point is to slash education, slash healthcare, slash supplemental nutrition assistance programs, and so on, because otherwise everything's going to be too expensive. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah. And, when I had to balance the budget in the state that really hadn't been balanced for so many years and had to pay off these debts, what we really looked at was, look, you can raise taxes, you can lower spending, you can do some of each of those things, or absolutely the best way to help pay the bills and bring in more revenue is not to raise tax rates, although I wanted a graduated system, but is not to raise tax rates, but rather to grow the economy. I mean, that's really the best thing you can do. And you talked about Massachusetts investing in their tech economy and kind of jobs of the future. Indeed, that's something that I've been focused on too since my first year in office. I wanted us to be the hub of quantum technology in the world. And we have the right to win in that regard here, just like Massachusetts did at the time that it was making its investments. But, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, Northwestern, our institutions here start out with some of the best technology and the best scientists in the world. And we happen to have already been a leader in quantum development, quantum mechanics and such. And so we made real investments because that is an industry of the future that can make us the Silicon Valley of a next generation technology. And so we've made those investments, and guess what? It's paying off. We're seeing companies like IBM and PsiQuantum and companies whose names you haven't heard of yet, but you will soon enough, attracting them to the state. And at the same time, saying, hey, Kalshi, Polymarket, these, prediction markets, the, crypto companies that, like, there are some things that we just don't believe in here and think. I'm not saying we don't think cryptocurrency has a place, but this idea that you're going to deregulate everything and then somehow that's going to be good for everyone. Well, guess what? We already know Polymarket, Kalshi as an example, are taking advantage of people. There's a lot of corruption associated with it. We've seen people being arrested for the corruption at the federal level at Polymarket. And so we know, what's right and wrong here. And we know that you can grow the economy by making the right kinds of investments and creating jobs and things that are going to have a growth rate that will bring Illinois from having had half of the growth rate of the United States to being ahead of the curve.
So, in fact, what you are suggesting is that you are proving what the Reagan Revolution tried to demolish, the idea that the only way to increase economic growth is to cut regulations and cut taxes, which has never been the case. You are actively doing the opposite and saying, hey, look, it works, right?
I am saying that you have to have a government that actually works for people. And, one of the things I get that people are losing faith in government across the country, and just look at what's happening in Washington, and it will make anybody lose faith. But, one thing that I really believe, and it's why I think that governors, who might run in 2028 for president or in any other year have a kind of advantage, but particularly in this moment, is that we have to deliver for the people of our states. We don't just vote on something and then when it doesn't pass, we get to say, well, we voted for it. And so you should like me because I voted for it. We have to actually deliver things, and balanced budget is an example of that, but services that people need in their everyday lives. And so trying to, I think delivering for people is what really matters. Like you got to actually do the things that you say you're going to do. And I put forward a big, bold agenda when I ran my first time and my second time. And we've gotten most of that done. And the things that we haven't gotten done, we're either continuing to try to get done, a more progressive tax system, for example, something we're still working on here, but I've been an advocate since day one. And not destroying government, but making sure that we're focusing government, and this is what budgeting is all about, on the priorities that really matter for working families. So we could put Springfield back on the side of working families.
Oh, so again, this is exactly what FDR did. He took the policies that had come out of New York City and then gone to Albany and turned them to what happened at the federal level. So this is one of the reasons I'm so interested in what you are doing in Illinois, because it looks very much like Teddy Roosevelt pulled out of Wisconsin with the Wisconsin plan, and what FDR pulled out of New York. And watching you pull it together in Illinois is really interesting. But on the idea of that you've mentioned a couple of times, what's happening with the current administration in Washington, you have very much been out front in taking on Trump in a number of ways that I wish we had time to go into, because I think your personal calling him out has been very effective in a very different way than other people calling him out has been. But I'm really interested in your pursuit of the Accountability Commission and your repeated warnings to people who are engaging in unlawful behavior that this is not going to go away, that Illinois is keeping a record. And I would like to have you talk us through that. First of all, how it works. Second of all, why you think it's important. And third of all, what effect do you think it's going to have on national politics going forward?
Well, I want to remind everybody that's listening, and you, Heather, you probably already know that before everybody was paying attention to the attack on Minneapolis by CBP and ICE, they came to Chicago. And we indeed had two people who were shot by CBP, one killed, one shot 5 times. Thank God she survived. In fact, she testified before Congress and testified before our Accountability Commission. But we were under attack. And so we had to educate people about what their rights are and what the Constitution of Illinois, the Constitution of the United States, says about their rights so that they could protect themselves. Secondly, we had to make sure that we were encouraging peaceful protesting, but standing up and speaking out. And then third, we wanted to make sure that we would hold people accountable. And I'm talking about the federal officials who were clearly either breaking the law or were taking advantage of federal supremacy to imprison people or detain people, mistreat people, and so on, in a way that the federal government's really not done in my lifetime.
And so stop just a minute there, if you would, and explain to people what you mean by that. The federal agents and what they claimed the right to do in Chicago.
Well, they were coming into Chicago, and first of all, they would stop you if you were black or brown, if you spoke with an accent. Indeed, they didn't even need an excuse, according to them. They would just stop people and say, show me your papers. Show me your papers. Now, I helped build a Holocaust museum, so I can tell you that that sentence is frightening enough all by itself. But show me your papers. Prove to me that you're a U.S. citizen. And they could do this to anybody. Who did they choose to do that to? Black and brown people and people who spoke with an accent. And the only 5% of the people that they detained were people who were undocumented and had broken a law. So 95% were just people who were either U.S. citizens or had every right to do what they were doing and shouldn't have been stopped. But they were using the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution to suggest that their law enforcement simply carrying out their duties, and that it includes, immigration control in our cities. By the way, the Customs and Border Patrol belong at the border of the United States. We're not a border state. It wasn't created to come into a city like Chicago, and yet CBP was sent here along with ICE. So we were under attack. They were not only detaining people, but they were forcefully taking people down. They were busting doors down. They were going into schools and checking to see if the teachers and some of the students were U.S. citizens. It was an invasion. And then the president tried to call out the National Guard here in Illinois and our National Guard, and bring in Texas National Guard and California National Guard, federalized, to attack our city. And we pushed back. Our Attorney General and I worked together to make sure that we ended up in the Supreme Court. We actually won the case that has kept the National Guard out of our cities. And the militarization of our country that Donald Trump was attempting. So these are all things that were happening in Chicago. So what we wanted to do was make sure that if they were breaking the law, or if under normal circumstances they would have been held accountable by their federal supervisors or secretaries or the president of the United States, under normal circumstances, these CBP and ICE agents, that we would keep a record so that when things would return to normal, and we believe that we can do that when we have a new Congress and then a new president, that we would have the evidence in order to come and either prosecute people who deserve to be prosecuted for their actions, hold them accountable, perhaps suspend or fire them from the federal government, or take them to court and in a civil action and hold them civilly liable. So we did that. And it turns out that the evidence that we were gathering is actually very useful for us to take some of the cases to federal court while CBP and ICE were here, and make sure the federal court was imposing limits on what they could do based upon the evidence that we had gathered. We had judges that led this commission that we created, and lawyers and others who had served in either immigration advocacy organization or other like organizations, look at this evidence, take testimony, gather video. And this is the other thing I told everybody in Chicago and all across our state: pull out your phone, turn it on video, and video everything that you see from ICE and CBP, because it will be evidence, and then post it online or ultimately submit it to the Accountability Commission. And that's what our Accountability Commission has done. It's still active. It did come out with an initial report, but we are prepared in case CBP and ICE come back to be able to reactivate the testimony and gather the video if we end up in that situation again.
And what do you think that demanding accountability, first from you, but across the country, will do going forward? Do you think it's going to make a difference in the way people interact with this administration or the way we rebuild going forward?
Well, as I say, either we're going to be able to actually hold these people accountable, which I believe we will, and I should say, I think it's a message to the CBP and ICE agents on the ground that they may feel like they have some sort of immunity because they're working for Donald Trump, who isn't going to hold them responsible, or Kristi Noem when she was in office, or Markwayne Mullin, who's now running DHS. They may feel like they're immune, but the reality is maybe it will take us a couple of years. Maybe it will take winning in November the Congress with people who actually believe in the Constitution, Democrats, in order for us to hold them accountable. Or maybe it's that and the presidency. But these people know that their actions now are going to be recorded and they're going to be remembered, and they will be held responsible, if not today, tomorrow.
Well, it's funny because you're focusing on the Border Patrol agents and the ICE agents, but certainly when you were talking to the cameras, it sounded like you were making a blanket statement about everybody in the administration. And they certainly appear to be thinking that way these days.
Well, we did talk about Kristi Noem, for example, or Tom Homan or Greg Bovino. These are all people who had different levels of supervisorship over people underneath on the ground, because it is about them. And we invited them to testify. We have no subpoena power at our Illinois Accountability Commission, but we intend to have, and we have gathered evidence that would be useful even in the event that we're able to come after those officials too. So it isn't just about the ones on the ground, but we did want to send a message to the ones who are perpetrating the acts on the ground that, you shouldn't be following illegal orders, that you are going to be held accountable if you do something wrong. So you better think about it while you're performing your law enforcement role. And there's a real look, FBI, DEA, ATF, rather, we work with them every day to go after the bad guys, right? Gangs, guns, drugs. These are all things that we want off our streets. And we have historically worked with all those agencies. But CBP and ICE really haven't been, this way ever in my lifetime. And so we wanted to make sure that we were sending a message and ultimately holding them accountable.
So, Governor, again, I'm fascinated by what's going on in Illinois and fascinated in this moment at how people on the ground are making a difference in reconceiving of what American democracy can look like. And it seems like that's the project underway currently in Illinois. If you were going to offer to ordinary Americans, everyday people, what they can do and should be doing in this moment to help rebuild democracy for the future, what would you tell them to do?
I'm so glad you asked that question because, for the last year and a half since Donald Trump took office, people have been asking this question, what can I do? What can I do? And, and people are disappointed that Democrats in Washington don't have power, and they don't. I mean, elections have consequences, and we're seeing it now. But there have been moments when the Congress could do something and didn't. And then moments when Congress finally, got the, kind of spine to go stand up to the administration. And so the question, though, people continue to ask is, what I need to do something. I'm frustrated. I'm outraged. What can I do? The peaceful protesting has been huge. And, it's the No Kings protest, yes, but just the everyday protesting. We had a woman who came out in February of 2025 in Edwardsville, Illinois. That's in southern Illinois, central southern Illinois. And she just didn't know what to do. And she made a poster, a sign, and she went and stood at the crossroads of two state roads and just stood there holding her sign up. And on the first day, she was the only person standing there doing that. And somebody walked by with their dog and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, I can't stand it. The Trump administration is coming after our rights, and I just won't stand for it. So this is what I know I can do. And, the next day, 3 people showed up to protest with her. And the next day, about 10 people. And now every Friday, about 300 people show up. There in Edwardsville has 28,000 people in it. So 300 people showing up every Friday, and often different people wanting to express themselves. So peaceful protesting is number one. Number two, making sure you're videoing the abrogation of people's rights as they're happening. And that really worked for us to push back on ICE and CBP. But I don't mean to focus entirely on that. The most important thing right now is we have to win the November elections. I mean, we are on the precipice of something terrible in this country if we do not get a change in Washington, in the Congress. And at least we can win the House. We might be able to win the Senate. And either one of those would at least stop the administration in its tracks. It might not reverse the damage that they've done, but it stops the downward slide of democracy, I believe. And then, of course, there are lots of broader things that we need to be talking about. I think we need to put an agenda together, what I will call Agenda 48, because the next president would be the 48th president. Agenda 48 that has a list of things that we will get done immediately. Some of it is about standing up for people's rights, but some of it are things that, we Democrats took too long. Democrats in Congress for years and years and years have talked about universal health care, and Obamacare was a nice, move forward in that regard. But we don't have universal health care in this country. And how long have we talked about it? I think Harry Truman was talking about universal health care. There you go. So, but we need to do it finally. So how about if we make a list? $7.25 minimum wage on a federal level. No one can live on that. We should have raised the minimum wage long ago. That should be number one on the list. Number two is universal health care, or whatever order you want to put these in. Number three is guaranteeing people's rights. Number four is let's end corruption by the presidency and in the White House. Because, boy, I don't think people are paying enough attention to what's happening right now, but literally he has created, it is like the Gilded Age, the amount of corruption that is happening in Washington. And I don't think that there's enough coverage of it. Donald Trump is literally he's trying to be Vladimir Putin and become, as the political leader, also the wealthiest person in the country, and taking it essentially from he's deregulating everything that'll help his family make money and taking it from the taxpayers. So I think these are all things that we need to make an agenda about. It needs to be enumerated, and then we need to go fight for it and get it done. Because the one thing we've learned from Donald Trump is that Project 2025 that we all talked about and said that was his agenda, and he denied it. Guess what they did? In less than a year, they effectuated most of Project 2025. And we Democrats, we had the ability, we had majorities in the House, the Senate, the presidency in 2009, for example. And all due respect, we really only got Obamacare out of it. What about comprehensive immigration reform? What about all the other things I just mentioned? It's been since 2009 we had the ability to do it and didn't get it done. Time to get it done.
All right. Agenda 48. I am there. I'll be the scribe while you and the people across the country figure out what you want on that. But I think you're right. We have a pretty good sense of what people would like to see happen going forward. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we do it again. I'm watching your state really closely, and someday we'll write about the parallels between what you're doing and Wisconsin did in the progressive era. It's fascinating to watch. Good luck to you. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And we'll catch you again very soon. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you from the land of Lincoln.